Hello, hi everyone. As mentioned, my name is Joy Horvath. I'm so happy to be here, and super extra thank you to Games Ground Berlin for allowing me to do this talk remote. To start out, I'm a senior program manager at Unity Technologies. I run the Elevate program, which is dedicated to guiding early career talent in their first role in games and broader creative industries. Before joining Unity, I split my time between game development and games education. I've had a lot of different roles over the years, from a very brief stint in QA testing, to 3D modeling, to animation, rigging, general Unity development, XR development, and a bunch of other contract roles that I hardly remember at this point. I spent a lot of my early years in games grabbing any gig that I could, regardless of how small or poorly paid that it was. In retrospect, this was not really the most effective use of my time, and it put me under way too much stress. But it did give me a really broad skill set that came in handy later when I began teaching. Why, yes, I can teach that character rigging class. Please give me enough work to be considered a full-time employee. I also went to college for game development, but unfortunately, I didn't choose the best school to do so. My education was lacking on a lot of levels, but particularly when it came to actually how to find a job. Once I graduated, I was basically left to the wolves. Now, I can't blame the school entirely for this because I also graduated during the height of the Great Recession, so it wasn't as if there were a ton of jobs to direct me to anyway. I bring this all up because my background deeply informs how I shaped my personal career in games, and it also puts me in a very unique position for the work that I do today. For those of you that have been in games at least as long as I have, the current state of the industry probably feels very familiar to the dark times of the recession. It isn't exact, of course, but as the saying goes, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. People losing their jobs overnight, companies thought to be impossible to topple suddenly dissolving as if Thanos snapped his fingers, and some of the most dynamic and brilliant talent our industry has on offer remaining unemployed for weeks, months, even years. Yeah, I remember this. I've been through this hell before. But the good news is that eventually this will end. We will find our way out because that's what we do in games. We solve impossible problems. So, this is why, even though the industry is on fire right now, I'm advocating for the next generation of game developers. It may not seem like the best time to be thinking about how to support junior talent when senior talent is struggling to find work, but the struggle of one does not negate the struggle of another. Solving the state of games right now is a multifaceted affair, and this just happens to be the facet that I've set my stake in. There will never be a proper time to think about how we could fix the junior talent pipeline, because our industry will never be perfect and calm, because it's not and never will be static. We must both build and repair the plane as it's flying. So, let's talk about it. When we talk about why recent grads struggle, it's tempting to put the responsibility on the grads themselves. But I want to be really clear about this. Recent grads are reacting to the systems around them. Now, they don't exist in a vacuum. And this doesn't imply that grads don't have an inherent responsibility to ensure their own market readiness, but rather to highlight that they're learning what to value, how to work, how to communicate, and how to present themselves from the environments that shape them. So for the rest of this talk, I'm really going to be just focusing on two groups. First, academic institutions who prepare students for the industry that they hope to shape their careers within, and then employers who ultimately decide which candidates cross the threshold into the professional world. Recent grads are affected by both, and solving the problem cannot begin with them. It has to start with the systems that instruct them and the systems that hire them. So, let's start with academia. And with academia, let's start with the perception that I hear all the time from employers when it comes to schools that offer game design programs. They're behind the times. Academia moves so slow and the game industry moves so fast. By the time that academic institutions are able to get access to new software or write curriculum that includes new production methods, they've all become old and the industry is on to something else. Next, schools teach the tools, but not the process. Students don't know how to work in a production environment. As a former instructor, I've seen this issue countless times. There's a tendency for schools to teach tools in isolation, which makes total sense for the classroom, but not for a production studio. Teaching someone how to rig a character in Maya, but not how to export it into a game engine, not how it'll be used in conjunction with animations that someone else has built. From a production standpoint, that's an incomplete skill that's been taught. And then finally, this last issue is one that employers often place on grads themselves, but as we've established, the source of the issue stems from their education. New grads are terrible at applying for jobs. New grads have this perception that snagging an interview in the industry is just a numbers game. If they apply to 100 jobs, then surely they'll get at least one interview. And if they're having to work so hard to get that many applications out, their resumes have to be generic, and their portfolios have to represent every single thing that they can do. And oh, if you're going to try and talk to somebody at the company, only try and talk to a recruiter. And yeah, this one bothers me a lot. But if you look at the three issues that I just covered, you'll notice that they're not all necessarily true. Granted, some may be truer than others, but let's really look into these and figure out how we can make some minor adjustments to make a big difference. So let's start with the concept of schools are behind the times. This, of course, is a really big generalization. Yes, there are some schools where this may be true, but there's also an equally large number of institutions that remain on the cutting edge of industry requirements. There's this perception that academic institutions move at a glacial pace when it comes to updating resources and curriculum. And while that part may be more often true than not, it completely overlooks the incredible work that educators do to supplement their courses with new tools and techniques. The institution might be behind the times on paper, but often in practice, educators have kept their students very current. To solve for this, employers and academic institutions just need to talk more. Any academic institution that has a game program should endeavor to build a relationship with not only local companies, but any major game companies that exist in their general region. If your institution doesn't have one yet, strongly consider forming an industry advocacy board to help inform the direction of your games program. This will not only build awareness of your program with the companies on the board, but also build general industry trust with your program. Now, on to issue 2. Schools teach the tools, but not the process. This specific issue is a bit more complex because employers often overlook the fact that academic institutions have certain requirements that they have to meet in order to be accredited. The idea that an entire cohort can just work on a single game together for 4 years is great in theory, but that doesn't actually work from an institutional perspective. However, what academic institutions can do within the bounds of the courses is ensure that each subject covered includes at least one unit on how the subject fits into the broader production ecosystem. When possible, coordinate with other classes to make use of other student coursework. Create situations where students have to work with each other across different classes to accomplish a task. And whenever possible, have work be group work. Now, I know it's the bane of college students everywhere, but the reality is that game production is nothing more than one big group project. If students want to work in a studio, they have to be comfortable with working with other people, and specifically, people they didn't choose to work with. So it's better for them to just get past the feelings of awkwardness as quickly as possible. The worst possible outcome for a game student is that their first experience working on a group project is during their capstone. Finally, grade your students on their ability to work in a production team. I can't emphasize this enough. Students must understand that their interpersonal skills are equally, if not more, important than their technical skills. In my many conversations with recruiters, time and time again, they've shared that if there are two candidates being strongly considered for a role, it will always go to the person with better interpersonal skills, even if that person has weaker technical skills. And again, this comes down to the fact that games are made in groups, and nobody wants to spend years working in a group with somebody who's terrible to interact with. So that leaves us with the final employer perception. New grads are terrible at applying for jobs. And unfortunately, there's a lot of truth to this one. But like I mentioned before, it isn't necessarily the new grad's fault. It's been my observation that an uncomfortable number of academic institutions do very little to prepare their students for the professional world. And I should mention here that this isn't just an issue exclusive to games programs. I've seen the same problems in business and history programs, among others. This seems to be a genuine blind spot in academia, and to be transparent, I've yet to figure out why it's happening, only that it is. The following are a few major issues I've seen specifically in game programs. First, grads do not understand the difference between an academic portfolio and a professional portfolio. Whether it was expected that they'd intuit the difference or the institution itself doesn't realize there's a difference, students are applying for jobs with their academic portfolios, and it is actively hindering their ability to get work. So we're all on the same page here. Academic portfolios typically include work from many or all of a student's classes. This includes foundational courses, general education, and projects that may not be directly related to their intended career path. The breadth of the work demonstrates to the academic institution that they've met the requirements necessary to earn their degree. The problem, of course, is that much or even most of this content is irrelevant to employers who are looking for a candidate's current abilities and professional focus. In contrast, a professional portfolio is a carefully curated snapshot of a person's skills as they are today. It emphasizes depth and mastery in the areas most relevant to the jobs that they're seeking. When a grad transitions from a student to a professional, it's important to shift their portfolio from an academic showcase to a professional marketing tool. They must focus on quality over quantity and make sure that every piece presented reflects their current abilities and the type of work they want to do in industry. Earlier this year, I did a large scale portfolio review for research purposes. And the vast majority of portfolios that I looked at had irrelevant content for the jobs the grads were pursuing. An audio engineer portfolio included life drawings. A programmer had character models. A 3D artist included illustrations. And because these extra bits weren't areas where the grads specialized, all of the pieces were notably weak, meaning their inclusion not only distracted from the true subject of their portfolio, it also made the sum total of their work look bad. When I asked grads about the inclusion of this extraneous work, they all told me the same thing. They put it in because their schools told them to. Every single portfolio that I reviewed had also been used to apply for jobs. This is a direct example of academic institutions giving advice to their students that ultimately hurt their career opportunities. So please, don't do that. Make it clear to your students early on that academic portfolios are not the same as what they should be applying for jobs with. Give them clear guidance on what to remove from upon graduation and what additional pieces would benefit their portfolio. Reinforce the idea that they should keep a living portfolio, a collection of work that they actively update and curate, ensuring that it always reflects their current skill level and the creative direction in the domain that they are pursuing professionally. Next, grads don't know how to format their resumes. And I get that resumes can feel like a complicated document to create, and there are a lot of opinions out there about how they should look, whether they should include colors or art or photos, please don't, or an unusual format to catch the eye. There are people whose entire career is spent just writing other people's resumes, and they make really good money. But please, let me set this for rest once and for all for the sake of the games industry. Make resumes boring. Plain text, no pictures, no colors, no images, no tables, no columns, no landscape format, no anything that you would have to do outside of Notepad. A resume is not a special document. It only has a single goal: to efficiently communicate your relevant skills and experience for the specific job you're targeting. That's it. If an academic institution ensured that their graduates all left with a solid understanding of the actual purpose of a resume, how to format and customize it to the jobs that they're applying for, they would immediately put their students at a significantly greater advantage than many recent graduates that are out there today. Next, grads don't know how to present themselves. This is another major area where grads need actual academic support, their professional presence, and especially online. And really, when you think about it, this is actually understandable because professionalism is not something that you're born knowing or even necessarily learn by osmosis. It's taught, it's modeled. And when it isn't, students end up trying to figure it out on the fly, and that often doesn't go well. LinkedIn is a great example of this. I've seen new grads very quickly fall into the practice of treating LinkedIn like a venting space about how terrible the job market is. And that's not really what it's for, right? It's a professional network where hiring managers, recruiters, and future colleagues get their first impressions of them. Now, this isn't surprising that this is happening if you looked at what's going on at LinkedIn lately. You know that there are a lot of posts about how terrible the industry is right now. So, students naturally think that they need to follow that trend. But if you ask recruiters and hiring managers, seeing negative posts like this sour their attitude toward a candidate. So, trying to follow what appears normal on LinkedIn actually actively harms a new grad's job prospects. And it's not that the grads shouldn't acknowledge struggle. They absolutely should. But LinkedIn is both a public and a professional space. This isn't an issue about toxic positivity, it's about understanding audience. And that distinction needs to be taught, not assumed. So, academic programs can help here by teaching the difference between public and private online presence, showing examples of LinkedIn profiles that effectively communicate purpose, and help students write professional posts about themselves, ones that demonstrate curiosity and progress and reflection rather than despair. This isn't about being performative, it's being intentional. And you can't expect that just because a student has grown up in a world where the internet has always been part of their lives, that they'll naturally understand how to be professional in it. Finally, I want to address one of the most persistent misconceptions new grads have, and honestly, I think it's one that academia unintentionally reinforces. If I apply to 100 jobs, statistically, one will pan out. No, this is not how the current job market works, and it hasn't been that way for years. Amir Satvat, who, if you don't follow on LinkedIn, you absolutely should, talks about this in what he calls the 40 application wall. And the idea here is that if you've applied to 40 roles and have had zero callbacks, the solution is not to apply to 200 more. The solution is to stop and reassess. Applications are not a volume game anymore, they're a precision game. So I've done a number of surveys about people who have managed to actually successfully get into the games industry. And from these surveys, I found that the most successful first time applicants I see today, have applied to fewer companies, choose studios and roles that actually deeply align to their skills and interests, build relationships with people at those companies before they actually apply, and they tailor their portfolios to match the studio's values, culture, and craft. This takes more time and a lot more patience, but it leads to far better outcomes. So, academic programs should teach this shift now because it's a core job readiness skill. So, now let's move on to employers. And first, I just want to go back and re mention something as if we could ever forget, but I want to acknowledge the industry is on fire. And I feel this deep in my bones. People are overworked, teams are understaffed, and budgets are shrinking. Nobody has the time or emotional bandwidth for large transformational initiatives. But here's the thing, small changes compound. Culture shifts one policy, one hire, and one conversation at a time. So, for employers, I'm going to offer small practical steps. I'm not going to suggest tear down the whole system and rebuild it because we all know that doesn't work. So, these are just realistic, meaningful changes that can probably fit into the work that you're already doing. So, first and foremost, if I could ask employers to do just one thing, it would be this. Write clearer, more realistic job descriptions. If a job requires 3-shift titles and 7 years of experience, it's not an entry level role. If you say junior, but you want a mid level pipeline specialist, you're not hiring a junior. And let's be honest about why this happens. You have a junior level budget, but you want mid level talent. And again, I get it. But ultimately, this move serves nobody. It erodes trust among job seekers, especially recent grads, and it means more work for your recruiters as they sort through candidates who aren't actually who you really want, despite what you're saying on the job description. So instead, consider what the job might look like for somebody who actually was at a junior level and build a place for that role within your studio. Or If you really absolutely must have mid level talent for that role, call it a mid level role. Next, share your standards. Some studios already do this incredibly well, and I want to call out one in particular. UK based Adam Hawk has an entire section on their website dedicated to portfolio guides that they built for job applicants. Any candidate planning to apply for a role at Adam Hawk has a clearly defined roadmap for what the company is looking for. As far as I'm concerned, Adam Hawk represents an industry gold standard when it comes to supporting job applicants, and particularly recent grads, because they don't make developers guess at what good enough means for the company. They show precisely what they want. Now, I will recognize, however, that Adam Hawk has unmistakably put a huge amount of work into these guides, and they almost certainly took a great deal of time to put together. And of course, not every studio can invest the level of time and resources needed in order to do what Adam Hawk did. But every studio can write 2 paragraphs on what a strong portfolio looks like for their team. Include 3 to 5 bullets outlining how candidates will be evaluated for a role, and add one final sentence on whether that you expect a cover letter or not. That means 2 paragraphs, 5 bullets, and one sentence. That's it. An afternoon's worth of work, if that. If you make these small changes, you will be surprised, shocked even, how your application submissions transform. Now we get on to the slightly larger asks, but I hope to pull this back and make it feel a little less scary. But ultimately, yeah, I'm not asking you to overhaul your entire pipeline or bet your future on junior talent. I'm asking you to pick one. Hire one new grad a year. Commit to mentoring one emerging developer. Make space for one person to learn how to do this work well. Yes, even a highly qualified recent graduate is still going to need some level of mentoring, and that will require slightly more resources than your more experienced talent. However, if you specifically build that expectation into your pipeline for a single junior developer annually, it should absolutely be possible to accomplish. And you'll probably be shocked by how much less mentoring they need than your expectations might imply. And the reason why this is so important is because if every studio committed to just this single act, it would result in thousands of specific junior talent roles annually. And finally, bring back internships. Real studio experience is irreplaceable, and everyone from employers to academia recognize the importance of the internship. But traditional internship programs can be expensive and a high time commitment for companies to run. And again, with budgets and staff reductions, internships are often closed to try and save on these limited resources. But if traditional internships aren't possible at your company, what about non traditional internships? Even part time, even remote, even short term. Internships are too vital for the junior career pipeline to be abandoned. If you aren't sure how you could bring back interns into your studio environment, reach out to local academic institutions. This is another opportunity where the two should be talking to one another. Schools would jump at the opportunity to help you shape a new internship program in whatever form you can manage. If you can manage to bring back, again, just one internship slot, you are not just improving your pipeline, you're contributing to the long-term survival of this industry. So here's where this all leaves us. The industry that we inherit tomorrow is the one that we build today. So, yes, we are in a moment of instability right now, but we can and must work through it and keep our eyes towards the future. As the current form of the industry burns around us, we must decide how we want to shape what comes next because there is something coming next, and we get to define it. We have the ability at this moment in time to invest heavily in the future of our next generation of game developers by supporting junior talent today and making these changes with small, incremental adjustments to the pipelines we're already working within. The next generation of game developers are not a problem for another day. They're the people who will ensure the future of an industry that so many of us hold dear. And they're waiting for us to give them space. let's not make them wait for too long. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. I think we still have some time for questions to Joy. If you have anything you want to ask her, this is your chance, guys. I have the microphone. And Joy has some time. Yeah, we have a question. Make sure she can hear you.
Hi, Joy. Do you hear me?
I do. Thank you.
Cool. Sergey Voronov, University of Europe for Applied Sciences, and next semester is my internship semester. So,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah. Very, very cool talk, by the way. My question is, so what was your personal experience? How was it for you to find your very first job? Tell me, please.
It was so hard. So as I mentioned before, I graduated at the height of the Great Recession, and it was a situation where a semester before, many of my friends graduated ahead of me, and they got jobs very quickly. And then when it was time for my graduation, all of my friends were actually at my graduation ceremony because their companies had closed down and they didn't have anywhere else to go. So they were just going to celebrate me, which was kind of frightening. But really, I mention that because I graduated at a time where studios were literally closing down overnight. So I spent a lot of time applying for jobs, getting to the interview stage, and then not getting a call back because the companies didn't exist anymore. It was very challenging and very scary. But ultimately, I managed to get my first industry job at, should I mention? Yeah, it's fine. At Electronic Arts. I became a QA tester there. And it was great at first. I, went through training at the main office in California. And I was sent out to a partner company because they were publishing on different platforms and they had hired different companies to work on the platform ports. And I just got settled at the company. I had been working there for I think 2 weeks when all of a sudden I noticed that a lot of people stopped showing up for work. And then the head of the department just walked up to me and said, "Hey, we're closing down and we're canceling this build of this game that you're testing." And that was the end of my QA testing career. And I spent, I think, the next following year, if I remember correctly, leaning really heavily into contract work. I used platforms that were basically the equivalent of Fiverr. The ones that I used, I'm sure, don't exist anymore. But the idea is that people would post jobs that they needed done for games, and I would bid for them. And obviously, the lowest bidder would get the job, and so I got a lot of jobs for not very much money. But yeah, I slowly built my career over these kind of patchwork experiences. So I didn't have a really clean entry into the games industry. And I would say it would be probably about 2 years before I actually fully started my career where I was working continually, whether that be like more reasonable contract jobs to eventually teaching. But yeah, it took a while and it was not clean and it was not easy. But I think the most important part of mentioning this is to say that you can absolutely get into the industry even when things are on fire like they are today. It just may not be what you expect to have happen, but there's no perfect way of entering games. Like very few people just you know, have the school experience and do their internship and then immediately get a job without any hardship in between. So yeah, it's not always easy, but you will eventually get there. So I recognize that you're probably in like a place where you're nervous about what's happening because it's time for internships, but you'll be fine. Just keep the course.
All right. Do we have another question for Joy? Yes, in the front.
First of all, thank you for the great talk. It was very informative. I'm a student studying like game design, and I'm especially like, interested in like the narrative field of game design. And something that I was wondering is if you have like any like tips on what maybe us students or graduates can like do or like convey to employers to like make them more likely to like hire us, even if they are not, especially like looking for someone. Because, for example, with like narration, I feel like a lot of companies don't necessarily like leave the space for like new people to join for that. And yeah, if you have anything that we as graduates maybe can like do to make it like less scary for them.
Of course. Yeah, this is hitting on what I mentioned in the talk, where like ultimately what it comes down to is employers are very risk averse right now, and that's why they're hesitant to bring on graduates. But the advice that I always give is basically show what you can do. The answer the answer is essentially game jams, but obviously it's slightly different for narrative designers, so that doesn't have to be. But create small versions of your product, so narrative design, at what you feel is commercial level. Make sure that your samples are the highest possible quality that they can be. Make them small and easy to digest, and start showing people these pieces. Because if you can show that you're already producing at a professional level, it makes the scary factor of the fact that you're, new to games, less intimidating. So, oh, this person has just graduated, but they're already producing at a professional level. So maybe let's not think about the fact that they're new. Let's look at what they can do today. Often, far too often, as I mentioned before, grads have a tendency to not update their portfolio as much as they should be. I often say that your first job in games is actually getting your first job in games. You should be treating your job search as a career. So constantly updating, producing new content, and just seeing how companies respond to what you have. If you're not getting callbacks with your portfolio, it's a good sign that your portfolio isn't actually up to par, and just keep iterating on it. And also, as far as marketing goes, because we're effectively talking about marketing yourself here, be very present on at least one social media platform of choice. I know it's very difficult. There's a lot of things going on with social media, but people in industry are also on social media, and there are so many stories of somebody just browsing around on Twitter and seeing some kind of art or audio or narrative or something that they really like, and thinking, hey, I should talk to this person because we have a role coming up. So I guess be present online and show off your best work at any opportunity that you have, and that can help increase the odds. Unfortunately, it's still going to be a lot of work, and it's going to be a lot of knocking on doors, but just constantly keep track of whether or not you feel that you're showcasing your work at the best quality that you can in that moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. If we don't. Oh, one question for you, Joy.
Thank you. I'm also a graduate in media management, and I want to become a future producer. This year I went to Gamescom as well, and the most advice I got there was to just try to get into it, even if it's not the role of a producer, because producer is not an entry role normally in the industry. So I wanted to ask you if you also had the experience or saw it in the industry, as you're already working there for some years, that the industry itself, once you're in, and you can change roles, and you can find opportunities just asking in the company you're in to try out a new role or get experience in other roles, if that's something you experience as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now, I do want to say, like, as far as the game industry goes, once you're in, you're in. That's true, except when mass layoffs happen, right? Because then it kind of can knock you out again. But generally speaking, once you're in a studio structure, I think pretty universally, all of my professional experience every company that I've worked for has been really friendly to the idea of people wanting to move within the company or at the very least learn more about roles. At Unity, I've had 4 different job titles, and they've all stayed generally within the education sphere because that's what I'm interested in. However, I've been given a ridiculous amount of freedom in order to explore different areas. As a matter of fact, the role that I'm in right now, I never considered to be a program manager before. That's not something that I ever thought about until I actually got in. And as soon as I started expressing an interest in, building a program, kind of everybody came out of the woodwork to support me. So it really is quite normal to start one place in games and then end up in some place completely different. That's why the advice on if you want to break into games, go into QA testing holds so much water even to this day, because once you're in a studio, you start building your network, you start building connections, you start having conversations. And really, with games, that's where magic happens, is through conversation. So, yeah, I think it's perfectly viable to start in, a lateral position or maybe a lower position than you're planning to end up with, and then just grow through. As far as producers go, I will also mention that I know a ton of producers who got into games without ever thinking that they wanted to become a producer. They came in as like the producer that I work with right now worked on the Unity Asset Store team. And he just kind of fell into the producer role over time as he took on more organizational roles within where he was previous to becoming a producer. So, yeah, 100% possible. And I will say it's been an interesting trend. I have noticed over the years a couple of associate producer roles. So they do exist. But just like every junior level job right now, they're hard to find. But I will say that it is a thing. It's not a common thing, but it's also not something you need to rely on to get to where you want to go.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. In the front.
Thank you. Hey, do you hear me?
Yep, I do.
Perfect. I'm also a student in the game sector. And what I was wanting to ask is, you talked a lot about how the academia can improve the education. But you as a teacher, I also want to ask, how can we as students improve our level of education and use the education we get in the best way?
Really great question. And the fact that you're asking that already indicates to me that you're a very good student. So really the most important thing that students need to be aware of is that as soon as they have the intention of entering the game industry, they're effectively part of the game industry and they should conduct themselves as such. You need to be aware of industry trends. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like what game is coming out. I mean, like, actually look into, like, what technology is coming out. What are current techniques for game development in the domain that you're interested in? Attend talks like this, read white papers when they come out, really get into the deep nerdy aspect of your industry and do it very early on. Because it's that much easier to integrate yourself in as a professional if you're already used to being in that space while you're a student. And another thing that I kind of alluded to, I mean, it comes down to portfolio, but as a student and then transitioning into a graduate and emerging professional, you truly have to be prolific at working within your craft. You have to constantly be working on portfolio pieces. You have to constantly be researching beyond what you're taught in school to see if there are any pieces of your education that maybe were a little bit behind at the times with the industry. Just keep building, keep iterating, keep working on your craft. I cannot tell you how often I look at a portfolio and I see pieces that are 1, 2, 3 years old. That doesn't demonstrate to me that you're dedicated to your craft. That demonstrates to me that you had coursework and that you did it and then you threw it up on a website and called it a day. What you really need to be doing is constantly improving yourself. And then once you get into a role, you're going to be constantly improving yourself, but on somebody else's dollar. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. So if you want to say hi to Joy, just make sure to scan the QR code.
Yep.
And then you can hit a message. Yeah, nice. Now you can scan it, guys. All right, I see a lot of phones. I still see a lot of phones. Good work, Joy. Now she disappeared. All right, thank you so much, Joy. Even though you weren't with us physically, this talk felt very, very close to us. Thank you so much. This is your applause.
Thank you.